Hello. Seneca would have said before, to quote Seneca, he said before, the best way to spend our time is by becoming timeless. And a lot of people seem to perceive that becoming timeless is posthumous fame. But yet, Marcus Aurelius, a fellow Stoic, said that he was absolutely not interested in posthumous fame. So, I don't believe that that's what Seneca meant by posthumous fame. And then that means, it brings us to the question, what does he mean by becoming timeless? What is immortality? So, in order to establish that, I think we have to first establish who we are and what we are. And that brings us to the first of nature's paradoxes. The Buddhists believe that the self is an illusion, that we are just part of a whole. I am the universe and the universe is I. And that would mean that I don't exist. And that's what I often mean by I don't exist. What that means is, if I am the universe and the universe is I, we are just an experience. And there is no I. The I is an illusion. An illusion created by the posterior cingulate cortex in the brain, which gives the identity of the self, which means that would mean that the self is an illusion. But then there's also other people that believe that there is only the self, I am, and they get locked in the self. And then people who get locked in the self, I've covered that before, they can't relate to being a part of the greater whole, and this causes suffering. Which means really that, as the Greeks would have said, excellence is recognizing the higher self, the lower self, and the ego, and everything together creates this, what you call the self. That is what I am. So then, in order to figure out what is immortality, if we were to say that the self is the body is one unit, as Heidegger said, the body and the mind work as one unit. So the spiritual and the physical both combine to create our reality. But some people can only perceive the physical as reality, and then there's other people who, for instance, if you get lost, you can get lost in the mind. You can, the Frames would have made a song about keep one foot in the reel, but you can actually get, in a Walter Mitty lifestyle, you can actually get lost in the spiritual as well. You can, for instance, if you're living in the future, you can actually get carried away by living. You're not even here. You're lost in the mind, if you know what I mean. Sartre would have said the same thing. That would have been his perception of freedom. That if the mind is incarcerated, if the body is incarcerated, the mind is still free. So he considered himself as the mind. But really, I don't perceive that as freedom. If I'm incarcerated, if you shackle my leg, I'm not free. For me, everything has to be free. If you know what I mean. So then we're back to what makes us us. And really, what would make us us is genetic sequencing. So genetic code. What makes me is my DNA sequence. Because if you narrow down what am I, we could nearly narrow it down to the nucleus of the self, which would be the frontal cortex, the prefrontal cortex. We could nearly narrow that down to the nucleus of the self, and then we could say we could attach the central nervous system, which is attached to the brain. So you could say the brain and the central nervous system is what you are, and the rest is a protective layer. But then, if we are predisposed to a way of thinking, I say we are predisposed to a way of thinking, and thinking is everything, because it's the thinking that creates our subjective reality, creates our reality. So this is why I say the thinking is everything. So I say we are predisposed to a way of thinking, but we're also predisposed to other talents as well, which means what makes us us is our DNA sequence. So if we were to say like, so in order for us to have existed previously or to exist again in the future, you would have to take our DNA sequence, that genetic sequence, and have used it and it had been used previously, and it would have to be reused in the future, and that would make us immortal. That would make us, because if you use this genetic sequence in the future and then tune it into that frequency, because our frequency interprets the energy that surrounds us, which means that we're coming on the same frequency with that interpreting the reality in the same manner. That means we get to exist again, if you know what I mean. So for example, a great warrior, for instance, as I say, the principles exist, are consistent. The principles are consistent, but the concepts change. So, for instance, like if you take Aidan Taggart Fogarty, he's a sports star that we have here in Ireland, and he's doing Dancing with the Stars at the moment. His genetic sequence might have been Achilles of Troy previously, do you know what I mean? And Achilles of Troy then, that genetic sequence might have been reused throughout history. So, for instance, like, he would have been a great warrior in the past, but that genetic sequencing would now make him a great sports star in modern times, and then, for instance, like, make him genetically disposed to be a great sports star. And the way that he is genetically disposed now, the way he takes on the dancing at the moment, is nearly superhuman. Like Achilles would have been considered superhuman when it became to warrior status. So the way he's adapting to the dancing at the moment is nearly, I'm telling you, like the way he's adapting to the dancing at the moment could nearly be considered superhuman. So that would be, say, like, if Achilles' genetic sequence was reused throughout history, that could be Achilles' genetic sequence is now Aidan Taggart Fogarty, if you know what I mean. So it would mean that Achilles is the same person, but the only constant is change. So if you go energy, matter, using that genetic sequence, that would make him and Achilles one and the same, if you know what I mean. So, for instance, like, so that would mean then, if you were to look at, and the way that would work as well is, because what we are really is a genetic pattern, if you know what I'm saying. We are a genetic pattern. So nature is a series of reoccurring patterns, and that is, if you look at nature and try to understand nature, because, as I say, in order to live in accordance with nature, you first have to understand nature. And as Spinoza said, that in order to understand nature, you have to study really some physics, some physics, all the different religions, lots of philosophy, some psychology. You have to study all aspects of nature, if you know what I mean, and not just limit yourself to one aspect of nature. So, for instance, if you limit yourself to psychology, you don't understand nature, or you only understand one aspect of nature. If you limit yourself to psychology, you can only understand one aspect of nature, which would be philosophy. But if you study all the different aspects of nature, as the Stoics did, they had a good understanding of psychology, they had a good understanding of philosophy, they had a good understanding of plant psychology, all aspects of nature, which gives them a good understanding of nature and allow them to live in accordance with nature. So, as Spinoza said, in order to understand God, which would be the universe, you have to understand all aspects study all aspects of nature. And if you understand all aspects of nature, you will realize that nature is a series of reoccurring patterns. So that would mean that us becoming timeless would mean that nature reuses our genetic sequence, which is a genetic pattern, a DNA pattern, a sequence, a pattern, if you know what I mean. So becoming timeless would mean that nature would reuse this pattern, which means becoming timeless is use our DNA sequence as a recurring pattern throughout nature. For instance, so but this would say, so for instance, Aristotle's genetic sequence that made him genetically disposed to think in the manner that he thinks and interpret energy, the energy that surrounds us, and which creates our reality, our interpretation of this energy, the portion of it that we can interpret. It would mean that Aristotle becomes timeless because his genetic sequence is reused throughout history to serve purpose. So, for instance, if you want a great leader, you would use the same genetic pattern to serve purpose. Do you know what I mean? But then this would also apply to Hitler. In order to balance things, you would use Hitler's genetic sequence in order to balance good and evil. Do you know what I mean? So it wouldn't be just use Aristotle's genetic sequence. The universe would also use Hitler's genetic sequence in order to maintain balance. Do you know what I mean? So, like, you can't just say, "Oh, Aristotle is good. He's good. That's the only good," because that's not. We don't get to perceive what's good. What's good is actually what's beneficial or serves purpose. What's in the interest of the universe. That's what's good. And that's what really defines good. What is in the interest of the universe. And if you understand nature, Hitler's did serve purpose. So he has become timeless, both in posthumous fame and in the fact that his genetic sequence would be used again to balance things, a recurring pattern. And this is why history repeats itself, and history does repeat itself for this reason, because the same genetic patterns would be reused. And this is what it means to become timeless. And then this would mean that for us to fulfill our potential, our human potential, we would have to first reach our genetic plateau, and then go beyond this. So, for instance, like, for instance, Achilles, as I say, Aidan Taggy Fogarty, would have be genetically disposed to be a great sports star, as he would have been a great warrior in the past, and then his genetic goes on, he easily adapts to the dancing, so he fulfills his fullest human potential, and then go beyond this. This is evolution, to go beyond this genetic, to where he would previously have stopped. So this is what it says, to nurture the soul. So, for instance, if you have Aristotle's genetic potential, if you have Aristotle's genetic potential, for you to nurture your soul beyond this and learn what you have not learned in the past, this would be to evolve. This is what it means to nurture the soul. Do you know what I mean? So, for instance, like, reoccurring so the recurrent sequences of plebs, for instance, would be bred in circuses, and they are entertained, as the Romans said, bred in circuses, and the Christians then identified this again, that the plebs are entertained by bred in circuses, and which would be the equivalent now of UFC, bred in games. So that'd be like the gladiators, the arenas of the gladiators, and this is sufficient to entertain the plebs. Like, give them bread and give them games to keep them entertained, and they go around in circles. They don't evolve, but everybody has the capacity to evolve. Fulfill your fullest potential, and then some. Go beyond that. Evolve. And to evolve then is to fulfill the genetic sequence, your human potential, which would be your genetic sequence, and then to mutate this genetic sequence, to go beyond this again. Do you know what I mean? So this is what I believe becoming timeless is, to reuse your genetic sequence again, and for you to to focus on what is within your control, which is to evolve this genetic sequence, if you know what I mean. So the spirit and the physical would work as one. The master would drive the slave. The master being the soul, the spirit, and would drive the slave, which is the physical. Or you can take turns as I do. Master and slave relationship to evolve. You know what I mean? It's all a bit complex, but I hope the better of you amongst you, you'll understand this. I'm not going to make this video again. You know what I mean? Okay, I hope you know what I mean. If you don't, you can ask and I'll make another video to explain it, but I think you should be able to grasp what I mean. I like to keep it real. I don't want to have to start, remaking the videos just because it's my best explanation of it. And if you have any questions, you can ask me. Ask me in the comments. As I say, as Nietzsche would have, it would be in alignment with what Nietzsche said as well. That our ancestry has a huge impact on who we are, because when our genetic sequence has been used in the past, wherever our genetic sequence is used in the past, say our 8 or 9 lives, however lives that might be used, for instance, in the past 2,000 years, as many lives we might have existed in the past, that then becomes us. So for instance, like, as I say, Aristotle, whoever was Aristotle then, and then Aristotle 1, 2, 3, 4, whoever Aristotle would be now. So for instance, Joe Rogan could be Plato. Plato might be Joe Rogan now. And how many times, so Plato would be Joe Rogan and Joe Rogan would be Plato. You know what I mean? And as I say, Aidan Taggy-Forty, he might be Achilles of Troy, and Achilles of Troy is Aidan Taggy-Forty. Like the universe is I and I am the universe. It's the same thing. You know what I mean? So you are your ancestors and your ancestors are you. I hope that explains it. As I say, if it doesn't, you can ask me in the comments. Thank you.